3 days before my wedding, I thought I was standing at the edge of the happiest chapter of my life. My fiancé, Ethan Blackwood, was everything I'd ever hoped for. Smart, compassionate, charming, and we'd spent 2 years building what felt like an unshakable bond. Every detail for our wedding was in place. The venue was booked, the flowers chosen, the menu finalized. Friends and family were traveling in, and the air around me was thick with joyful anticipation. But on that Wednesday afternoon, my picture-perfect plans began to crack. It started with a call from Victoria Blackwood, Ethan's mother, inviting me for tea. She sounded almost warm, which was unusual for her. She mentioned Ethan would be in meetings all day and suggested this was a chance for some quality one-on-one time before the festivities began. Exhausted from the final stretch of wedding prep, but hopeful this might bridge the awkward gap between us, I accepted. I drove up to the Blackwood estate, a sprawling mansion in Lake Forest that looked like it had been plucked straight from the pages of an architectural magazine. The circular driveway was immaculate, not a leaf or pebble out of place. My modest Audi seemed almost embarrassed to be parked next to Richard Blackwood's gleaming Mercedes. Inside, I expected the cozy sunroom where Victoria usually entertained. Instead, the housekeeper led me into the formal sitting room, a place that felt more like the scene of a high-stakes board meeting than a casual family gathering. Victoria and Richard were already seated, both dressed in tailored perfection. The tea service sat untouched between us, as if it were a mere prop. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Victoria began with a practiced smile. Richard wasted no time. We thought it important to discuss a few matters before the wedding, business matters that should be settled beforehand to ensure smooth sailing afterward. And then it appeared. A thick blue-bound document slid across the coffee table toward me. "This is a standard prenuptial agreement prepared by our family lawyer," Richard explained. "It outlines the protection of family assets and clarifies what would occur in the unlikely event your marriage to Ethan does not succeed." The words standard and unlikely did little to mask the cold weight of what they were asking. I hadn't discussed a prenup with Ethan, not once. I picked it up, scanning the first few sections. My background in tech had made me no stranger to contracts, and I recognized the lopsided nature immediately. The agreement was designed to protect the Blackwood fortune at all costs. In the event of a divorce, I'd walk away with virtually nothing, regardless of what I contributed during the marriage. There were even clauses that could give them a claim over intellectual property related to my business. "This seems very one-sided," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's standard language for protecting established family wealth," Richard replied, dismissing my concern with a flick of his hand. "And what about my assets, my business?" I asked. Victoria's lips curved into a condescending smile. "Your educational software venture is certainly charming, dear, but we are talking about substantial wealth and property holdings. The scale is quite different." In that moment, I understood exactly how they saw me, an outsider from a modest background who should be grateful to marry into their prestigious family. My achievements meant little to them. "When does this need to be signed?" I asked. "Today would be ideal," Victoria said smoothly, producing an expensive pen from her pocket. I set the document down. "I'll need my own lawyer to review this." Richard's eyebrows lifted. "Your own lawyer? Is that necessary? Our family attorney is one of the best in Chicago." "Best for the Blackwood family interests," I countered. "But as you've pointed out, our interests may not be perfectly aligned." The air grew colder. Finally, Richard said, "You have until tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Either you sign or the wedding is off." The ultimatum hung in the air like a bad smell. My chest tightened, not just from the blatant threat, but from the realization that they believed they held all the power. In their minds, I had only two choices: surrender my rights or walk away from the man I loved. I rose to my feet, clutching the document. "I'll speak with Ethan." "Ethan is aware of our position," Victoria said casually, as if discussing the weather. That line hit me like a punch. If Ethan knew and hadn't told me, what did that mean for us? I didn't respond. I just walked out, my heels clicking against the marble floor, the weight of the prenup heavier with every step. As I drove away, tears blurred my vision. Their words replayed in my mind, especially the ones they spoke when they thought I was out of earshot. "She'll sign." Victoria's voice drifted from an open window. Where else would she find a match like Ethan? Richard's low chuckle followed. By the time I reached my apartment, the betrayal had sunk in deep. I didn't answer Ethan's calls. I didn't want to hear his voice until I knew exactly where he stood. I needed to think about the wedding, the relationship, and whether I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. What they didn't know, what no one in their family knew, was that I wasn't the vulnerable, desperate fiancé they thought I was. Behind my modest lifestyle was a truth that could turn their smug confidence into shock. And as I stared at that document on my coffee table, a plan began to form. That night, the prenup sat on my coffee table like a silent challenge. I paced my apartment, replaying every condescending smile, every backhanded compliment, every subtle dig from the Blackwoods since the day I met them. They had crafted a neat little narrative about me, a teacher's daughter with modest means, lucky to be marrying into their empire. And I had let them believe it. Not because I was ashamed of who I was or what I had built, but because I'd made a deliberate choice to keep my financial life private. I wanted to be valued for my character, my work, and my values, not my bank account. The truth? I wasn't some penniless romantic swept off her feet by a wealthy man. I was a self-made entrepreneur with a multi-million-dollar safety net. The roots of my financial independence stretched back to my grandfather, my biggest cheerleader. He'd been a quiet man who lived modestly, never flaunting his success. While I was in my senior year of college, he passed away, leaving behind an inheritance that shocked everyone: $7 million. He had spent decades investing shrewdly in the stock market, buying and holding in ways that built an unassuming but formidable fortune. I invested most of it, determined not to squander what he'd worked so hard to build. With a portion of that inheritance, I launched EdutCheck Solutions, my tech startup focused on educational software. By 26, my company's valuation added another $2 million to my name. But here's the thing. I didn't live like someone worth millions. I rented a comfortable but unremarkable apartment in the city. I drove a practical car. I dressed well, but nothing about me screamed wealthy. In the tech world, flying under the radar had strategic advantages. And in my personal life, it allowed me to form relationships without the complications money often brought. Ethan knew I was independent and career-focused, but he didn't know the full picture. Neither did anyone else, aside from my parents, my best friend Jenna, and my lawyer, Harold. That secrecy had always felt like protection, but after the day's events, it felt like a liability. The Blackwoods thought they were holding all the cards, dangling the wedding over my head, confident that my fear of losing Ethan and public embarrassment would make me sign away my rights without question. They were about to learn just how wrong I called Jenna, my oldest and most trusted friend. She listened in growing outrage as I told her about the ambush. 3 days before the wedding? That's not just manipulative, that's a calculated power play, she said. And apparently, Ethan knew about the prenup, I admitted. There was a pause on the line. Ouch! Did he know they'd drop it on you like that? I don't know. But either he let it happen or he's got so little say in his family's decisions that they feel free to steamroll him. Neither option is good. What are you going to do? She asked. I glanced at the prenup. First, I'm going to call Harold in the morning. Then, I'm going to stop playing small. They want to make this about money? Fine. Let's talk about money. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. My financial portfolio lit up the screen. Investment accounts, savings, company valuations. My grandfather's inheritance had grown to $7.5 million through careful investments. EdutCheck Solutions had been valued at $1.5 million in our last funding round. Total, around $9 million. It wasn't Blackwood old money territory, but it was more than enough to shift the balance of power, enough to stand toe-to-toe with them on equal footing. The next morning, I set my alarm early. At 6:45 a.m., I was at my downtown office, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit and my pearl earrings, a quiet nod to my grandfather. When Harold arrived at 7 sharp, I handed him the prenup without ceremony. He read through it with the calm precision of a man who had seen every legal trick in the book. By the time he reached the final page, his expression had shifted from curiosity to grim disapproval. "This," he said, "is one of the most aggressively one-sided agreements I've seen in 45 years. Can we fight it?" I asked. "Oh, we're not just going to fight it," he said with a slow smile. "We're going to replace it with something that protects both parties equally." I told him exactly what I wanted: a fair agreement, protections for my intellectual property, and a clear statement of financial independence. Harold nodded, already jotting down clauses. "And your net worth is currently around $9 million?" he asked. "Yes, and the Blackwoods have no idea." His smile deepened. "Then this is going to be fun." As Harold began drafting, I felt a shift inside me. The fear and hurt from the previous day were giving way to resolve. This was no longer just about saving my wedding. It was about standing my ground, defining the terms. By the time Harold left my office that morning, I had a new prenup in hand, balanced, fair, and ironclad in protecting both my assets and Ethan's. But the contract was only half the battle. The real test would be Ethan himself. I hadn't spoken to him since the day before. His calls had gone unanswered, his texts left unread. That wasn't petty silence. It was strategic space. I needed time to process my emotions before hearing his voice again, because when we finally talked, I wanted to be calm, not cornered. I texted him just after Harold left. "We need to talk, 1 p.m. at Carlucci's, just us." His reply came quickly. "I'll be there. I love you." Those 3 words hit me like a bittersweet ache. I believed he meant them, but love wasn't the question. The question was whether he'd stand beside me when his family pushed back. When I arrived at Carlucci's, I chose a quiet corner table. The place held good memories for us. We'd celebrated our first anniversary here. That familiarity made what I had to do just a little easier. Ethan arrived right on time, looking tired. His usually sharp suit was a bit rumpled, and there were faint shadows under his eyes. He sat down, leaned forward, and said quietly, "Patricia, I'm sorry. I spoke to my parents last night after you left. It didn't go well." My stomach tightened. What happened? "I told them the ultimatum was unacceptable," he said, "that if anyone was going to cancel the wedding over this, it would be me, not them. That caught me off guard. And Dad said I was being naive. Mom cried and accused me of choosing an outsider over my family. It's the same manipulation they've been using my whole life." I studied him carefully. "Did it work?" He shook his head. "Not this time. I told them either they withdraw the ultimatum or I'll personally call every guest and explain exactly why the wedding is off." For a moment, I felt a flicker of pride, but I couldn't ignore what had happened before, the fact that he'd known about the prenup in the first place. "So you did know about it," I said. He hesitated. "I did, but I didn't know they'd ambush you like that. I was going to bring it up myself. I just kept putting it off because I knew it would upset you." "That's the problem, Ethan. You didn't tell me. You left it for your parents to handle like I'm some issue to be managed." "It's not like that," he protested. "I was trying to protect you from the stress." I let out a sharp laugh. "By letting them corner me and give me 24 hours to sign away my rights?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration clear in his eyes. "It's just a standard legal document. Everyone in my family signs one." "And have you actually read it?" I challenged. Another pause. "Not in detail," he admitted. That was all I needed to hear. "Then you don't know. It includes clauses that could give your family rights to my company's intellectual property." He blinked. "That can't be right." "It's right there in Section 4, Paragraph 3. Go read it yourself." His brows furrowed as he imagined it. I could see the first cracks forming in his certainty. "Ethan," I said quietly, "this isn't just about the prenup. This is about where you stand. Are you going to let your family dictate the terms of our marriage, or are you going to stand with me as an equal partner?" He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I love my parent." Patricia, but I love you too, and I want this marriage to work. Tell me what you want me to do." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder Harold and I had prepared that morning. "I want a marriage of equals. This is the prenup I'm willing to sign. It protects both of us. It respects what each of us has built." He opened it, scanning the pages. His training as a lawyer made him quick to recognize the difference. "This is fair, very fair. Why couldn't they just do this from the start?" "Because from the start, they didn't see me as someone worth protecting," I said simply. His jaw tightened. "Then we'll show them they were wrong." I studied him carefully, trying to read the truth in his face. "If we do this, it's not just about getting them to agree to new terms. It's about setting boundaries. If they can pull something like this 3 days before our wedding, what will they try once we're married?" "They won't," he said firmly. "Not if we set the line here." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe that the man I'd chosen wasn't just willing to love me, but to fight for us. "Then here's the plan," I said. "Tonight we meet them together. We present this as non-negotiable. We show them we're united. And if they can't accept that, then there's no wedding," he finished. Our eyes locked. It was the hardest truth either of us had spoken aloud, but in that moment I saw something I hadn't seen in him before, a quiet defiance, not just against his parents, but against the entire family system that had shaped him. He reached across the table and took my hand. "We'll face them together." And for the first time since that awful afternoon, I believed him. By the time Ethan and I left Carlucci's, the outlines of our plan were set. This wasn't going to be a meek, apologetic negotiation. It was going to be a calculated counterattack, one that left no room for the Blackwoods to twist facts or regain control of the narrative. Ethan's role would be critical. For the first time in his life, he'd have to stand toe-to-toe with his parents on an issue that mattered and refuse to fold. My role would be equally important, to dismantle their assumptions about me and replace them with an undeniable truth, one backed by facts, legal precision, and a little theatrical timing. The first step was logistics. Where we met them mattered. The Blackwood estate was their turf, home field advantage for intimidation. My downtown office might give the wrong impression, turning the conversation into a hostile business meeting. We needed neutral ground. I suggested Lakeview Restaurant. It was upscale enough to fit their sensibilities, but with private dining rooms that offered discretion, and importantly, the presence of staff would keep emotions from boiling over into full-blown theatrics. Ethan agreed instantly. Next came the arsenal. I wasn't walking in there with just a piece of paper. I wanted documentation that left no doubt about my financial standing and business independence, my investment summaries, bank statements, company valuation reports from our last funding round, everything neat, recent, and verifiable. And then, of course, the counter-prenup itself, Harold's meticulous work, which turned their one-sided power play into a legally balanced partnership agreement. It preserved both the Blackwood family's generational wealth and my own holdings, and it shut down any possible claim over my company's intellectual property. That afternoon, Ethan and I sat together at my office conference table to go over the counter-prenup line by line. "You've thought of everything," he said, shaking his head with a half-smile as he scanned one of Harold's clauses. "This even covers earnings from future joint investments without locking either of us out." "That's the point," I replied. "No one gets stripped of what they've earned. He's built, but we share in what we build together." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I should have done this with you from the start." I studied him carefully. "Why didn't you?" "Because," he admitted quietly, "I was conditioned to accept whatever my parents handed me as the way things are done. I never questioned the terms because I never thought I had to. Until you." That was an answer I could respect, not because it excused his earlier silence, but because it showed me he was beginning to see the difference between inherited rules and intentional choices. By 4 p.m., the plan was airtight. We'd present the documents together, with Ethan leading the conversation and making it clear this wasn't just my position. It was ours. We'd give them a fixed deadline for review and explicitly refuse any reversion to one-sided terms. But the real weapon? The reveal of my net worth. That was the pivot point, the moment when every assumption they'd made about me would collapse. They'd have to either acknowledge my equality in this marriage or reveal themselves as people whose opposition wasn't really about money at all. Before Ethan left, I looked him dead in the eye. One more thing. When they push back, and they will, don't leave me out there alone. If we show the slightest crack, they'll exploit it. He nodded without hesitation. We're in this together. After he left, I called Harold to finalize the fine points. Remember, he said, you're not there to argue them into liking you. You're there to establish terms. Whether they like you is irrelevant. I laughed softly. Good thing, too, because I doubt Victoria will be sending me a fruit basket after this. He chuckled. You'd be surprised. People respect what they can't steamroll. I spent the next hour assembling my presentation folder. The financial portfolio sat in one section, tabbed and organized. The prenup in another. I slipped a copy of Harold's credentials in the back, not because I doubted my own authority, but because sometimes the credibility of a seasoned attorney was its own kind of armor. Before I closed the folder, I added one final item, a handwritten note from my grandfather, found tucked inside one of his investment ledgers after his passing. It read, "Never let anyone decide your worth for you." That night, I allowed myself exactly one glass of wine. I needed my head clear, my confidence unshakable. This wasn't just about my marriage. It was about setting the tone for how I would be treated for the rest of my life by this family. The next morning, Ethan and I had a brief check-in call. You ready for tonight? He asked. Ready, I said. Just remember, we walk in together, we walk out together. Agreed. We also discussed potential curveballs. What if Richard tried to bargain piece by piece? What if Victoria pivoted to emotional manipulation? What if they simply refused to meet our terms? We rehearsed responses, keeping them calm, factual, and unified. By late afternoon, I was dressed and ready. Cream-colored dress, tailored blazer, my grandmother's pearls. My hair was pulled back in a sleek, low bun, professional but not cold. Every choice was deliberate. I wanted to project strength without aggression, capability without arrogance. Ethan met me outside the restaurant at 5:55 p.m., looking sharper than I'd ever seen him in a Navy suit that balanced authority and approachability. He gave my hand a squeeze. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "we're solid." I believed him. We walked through the restaurant doors as partners, not just in the romantic sense, but as a united legal and emotional front. The hostess led us to the private dining room I'd reserved. The room was ready. 4 place settings, crystal glasses catching the light, Lake Michigan visible through the tall whites and dows. Elegant but not ostentatious, the kind of place where the conversation would matter more than the setting. "They'll be late," Ethan predicted, glancing at his watch. "It's a power move." He was right. At precisely 6:17, the door opened and Richard and Victoria swept in. Both looked like they were stepping into a corporate takeover meeting. They didn't know yet that this takeover was mine. But before Ethan and I faced his parents together that evening, there was one conversation I needed to have, one that could make or break everything. It was about transparency. The prenup ambush had exposed more than just the Blackwoods' arrogance. It had revealed the fact that Ethan didn't know a fundamental truth about me. If we were going to stand united, he needed to have that truth before we walked into battle. So earlier that day, I'd arranged to meet him for lunch in the quiet corner of Carlucci's, the same place we'd had our serious talk the day before. It was a familiar setting, warm enough to soften the edges of what I was about to say. He arrived looking a touch more rested, but still wary, as if bracing for impact. We exchanged small talk until the waiter had taken our drink orders. Then I leaned forward and said, "Ethan, there's something you need to know before we go into tonight's meeting." His brow furrowed. "What is it?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were bank statements, investment summaries, and the most recent valuation report for my company. I slid it across the table toward him. When my grandfather died during my senior year of college, he left me a substantial inheritance. I invested most of it, used part to launch EduCheck Solutions, and have grown it carefully over the past few years. My net worth right now is about $9 million. Ethan stared at me, silent for a moment as he opened the folder. His eyes moved over the numbers: $7.5 million in diversified investments, $1.5 million in company valuation, before flicking back to me. Why didn't you tell me this?" he asked, his voice quieter than I expected. "Because I wanted you to love me for me, not my bank account," I said simply. "The same way you don't introduce yourself as Ethan Blackwood, heir to the Blackwood fortune, every time you meet someone. I wanted to know that our relationship was built on shared values, not financial leverage." He absorbed that for a moment, flipping through the papers again. "All this time, my parents have been treating you like someone who was just here for the Blackwood name." "I know," I said evenly. "It's ironic, isn't it? They assumed I had nothing, so they treated me like a gold digger. They thought they were protecting their son from being taken advantage of, when the reality is, I'm walking into this marriage as your equal." His mouth curved into the faintest smile. "More than equal in some ways. This isn't a competition, Ethan, but it is about respect. And if we're going to survive in a marriage together, your family has to understand that respect is non-negotiable." He nodded slowly, then looked back down at the folder. "I can't believe you've kept this to yourself all this time." "It wasn't about secrecy," I said. "It was about control, controlling how people saw me, avoiding the way money warps relationships. But now, that's over. Tonight, your parents are going to see exactly who they're dealing with." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he reached for my hand across the table. "Thank you for telling me," he said, "and for trusting me with this before you told them. It matters. I needed you to know so you'd understand why I'm not backing down. This isn't just about money, it's about principle." "I understand," he said firmly, "and I'm with you, no matter how tonight goes." That last part mattered more than he probably realized. The waiter returned with our drinks, and the tension eased slightly, but in the back of my mind, I kept replaying what was about to happen. Tonight wasn't just a confrontation about a prenup. It was the line in the sand for our entire future. As we wrapped up lunch, I slid the folder back into my bag. "Tonight you lead. I'll speak when I need to, but the first pushback has to come from you. If they see this as me versus them, they'll dig in. If they see this as us versus their outdated assumptions, we have a shot." Ethan nodded. "Got it. United front." And for the first time since the prenup appeared, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest, because love is one thing, but love paired with loyalty and a willingness to stand up to the people who raised you, that's something else entirely. That's the foundation of a marriage worth fighting for. At 6:20 p.m. sharp, Ethan and I stepped out of the car in front of Lakeview Restaurant. The late summer light spilled gold across the glass doors, but inside me, it felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The plan was clear, the evidence organized, and the strategy rehearsed. But strategy only works until the first strike, and I knew the Blackwoods wouldn't walk in quietly. The maitre d' greeted us by name and led us down a short hallway to the private dining room I'd reserved. The room was designed for serious conversations. Rich mahogany table, cream walls accented with modern art, soft lighting that made everything feel important. Through the tall windows, Lake Michigan glittered like polished steel. 4 place settings had been arranged, 2 on each side of the table. "They'll be late," Ethan murmured as we sat down. "Mom likes to keep people waiting. It's her way of making an entrance." He was right. At exactly 6:17 p.m., the door opened, and in swept Richard and Victoria Blackwood. Richard wore a charcoal suit that matched the one from the prenup ambush. Powerful, conservative, unyielding. Victoria's deep burgundy dress and diamond earrings were unmistakably calculated. She kissed Ethan's cheeks, ignoring me entirely, and took her seat as if she owned the room. Richard gave me the kind of curt nod usually reserved for distant acquaintances. "I trust you've come to a sensible decision," Richard said as he settled in. 9 a.m. came and went, but we're willing to be flexible. I kept my tone neutral. "We have much to discuss. Please have a seat." Something in my voice must have given them pause. Victoria's gaze narrowed, but she sat. Ethan began. "We've reviewed your prenup. It's unacceptable, in both its terms and in how it was presented. Patricia and I are entering this marriage as equals, and we expect any agreement to reflect that." Richard's jaw tightened. "It's the standard Blackwood agreement. Your brother and sister signed identical ones." "They married people from backgrounds similar to ours," Ethan countered. "The power dynamics were different. This is not the same situation." "This is not a sociology debate," Victoria said, waving her manicured hand. "It's about prudent legal protection." "That's exactly what we've brought," I said, placing my leather portfolio on the table and opening it. Inside, the top document was Harold's revised prenup, balanced, fair, and protecting both parties equally. Richard's expression darkened. "You were to sign our document, not create your own." "Plans change," I replied evenly, "especially when new information comes to light." Victoria gave a sharp laugh. "And what information is that? Your little software company hardly requires the same level of protection as the Blackwood estate." That was my cue. Without looking away from her, I slid a stack of neatly organized financial statements onto the table. My current net worth is approximately $9 million, $7.5 million in investments from my grandfather's estate, and a company valued at $1.5 million in our last funding round. The silence was delicious. Richard's lawyer instincts kicked in first. He reached for the statements, scanning them with an expression caught between disbelief and calculation. Victoria, however, was still frozen, her composure cracking just enough for me to see the shock beneath. "That's impossible," she finally said. "You drive a 5-year-old Audi." "I value financial responsibility over displays of wealth," I said calmly. "My parents taught me that. The same way your family's first patriarch built his fortune, through discipline and smart decisions." Richard set the statements down slowly. "These appear legitimate." "They are," I said. "Would you have treated me differently if you'd known?" Victoria didn't answer. She didn't have to. The flush in her cheeks said enough. Ethan leaned in. "The issue here isn't just money. It's respect. Springing this on Patricia 3 days before our wedding was manipulative and unnecessary." Richard straightened. "We thought it best to resolve it efficiently." "By threatening to cancel the wedding?" Ethan shot back. "That's not efficiency. That's coercion." Victoria's eyes flashed. "We were protecting the family legacy." "You were making assumptions about the woman I'm marrying," Ethan said, his voice low but firm, "and those assumptions were wrong." Richard glanced at the new prenup. "Some of these terms are unusual." "But fair," Ethan emphasized, "and they protect both families' assets equally." I kept my voice measured. "This agreement ensures property division is based on contribution and duration of marriage, not an automatic reversion to original ownership. It protects my intellectual property the same way it protects the Blackwood firm's holdings." Richard didn't argue. He simply said, "We'll need our attorneys to review this." "You have until tomorrow afternoon," I said. "The wedding is in 2 days. We need this resolved before then." Victoria bristled. "That's hardly enough time." "It was enough time for me to review your original document," I reminded her. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a steak knife. Richard seemed to recognize the shift in leverage. "We'll have our team review it first thing tomorrow. Any proposed changes must keep the fundamental balance of the agreement. Non-negotiable," Ethan added. "We're not reverting to one-sided terms." Richard gave a short nod, the gesture of one businessman to another. "Understood." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Victoria said quietly, "I may have misjudged certain aspects of your situation, Patricia." "That makes 2 of us," I replied. "Perhaps we can build on mutual respect from here." We didn't linger. The meeting had achieved its purpose. As we stood, Richard extended his hand to me. "You're a formidable negotiator. The Blackwoods may benefit from that." "I look forward to contributing," I said, shaking it firmly. Outside, the evening air felt lighter. Ethan slipped his arm around me. "You were magnificent." "We were magnificent," I corrected. For the first time since this battle began, I believed we'd just set the tone for our future. The next afternoon felt strangely calm compared to the days that had come before. I woke early, dressed simply, and went for a short walk to clear my head. The fight was no longer about whether the Blackwoods would accept a balanced agreement. It was about what, if anything, they'd try to slip past us at the 11th hour. At 2:55 p.m., Ethan and I sat in my office, waiting. I'd insisted the follow-up meeting happen on neutral ground again, with Harold present this time. The prenup we'd given them was already airtight, but having my attorney in the room meant there would be no misunderstandings or verbal manipulations. Right on schedule, Richard and Victoria arrived, this time without their air of smug certainty. They looked measured. Richard carried a leather briefcase, Victoria, a smaller folder. Neither sat until Ethan and I gestured to the seats opposite us. Harold, ever the professional, greeted them politely and took his place beside me. Richard opened with formality. "Our attorneys have reviewed your proposed agreement. They found it to be unconventional in some respects, but not unreasonable." "That's good to hear," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "There are a few adjustments we'd like to make," Richard continued. "Purely clarifying language, nothing that changes the balance of protection." Harold took the revised document and flipped through it, his pen moving steadily as he made margin notes. Every so often, he'd murmur a short question, and Richard would answer directly. To my quiet satisfaction, none of the changes undermined the core protections. It was almost anticlimactic. After the previous days of emotional ambush and posturing, this was business, just as it should have been from the beginning. When Harold reached the final page, he closed the folder and looked at me. "Nothing here alters the fairness of the agreement. I recommend signing." Ethan nodded immediately. "Let's do it." Richard placed the agreement on the table, and one by one, we signed. Me first, then Ethan, then Richard and Victoria as witnesses. Each signature felt like a line drawn in permanent ink. This is how it will be. Equal footing, mutual respect, and no more games. As I slid the pen back across the table, Richard gave a small nod. "This is acceptable." Coming from him, I knew it was as close to a compliment as I was going to get. Victoria's expression was harder to read. She wasn't smiling, but the cool disdain from our earlier encounters had softened. "And I hope we can put this unpleasantness behind us," she said. I met her gaze steadily. "That's the goal. Moving forward on clear, fair terms benefits everyone." Ethan rested his hand lightly on mine under the table, a subtle but solid show of unity. Harold gathered the signed documents, placing them in his briefcase with meticulous care. "Congratulations," he said, glancing between Ethan and me. "You've done what many couples never manage. Set the terms of your marriage before stepping into it. That's a foundation worth building on." When the Blackwoods left, Ethan and I stayed behind for a moment, the quiet in the room settling around us like a deep exhale. "Well," he said with a half-smile, "that was a lot less dramatic than I expected." "Because we didn't let it be," I replied. "We controlled the tone." He nodded. "I'm proud of you. Of us." Walking out of the building together, I felt lighter, not because the document was signed, but because the act of creating it and standing by it had shifted the entire dynamic between us and his family. The prenup itself would likely never be pulled from its safe deposit box, but its existence was a reminder of that shift. This wasn't just a legal win, it was a symbolic one. We'd faced down manipulation, drawn our boundaries, and made it clear that our marriage would operate on respect, not hierarchy. As we stepped into the afternoon sun, Ethan squeezed my hand. 2 days from now, we'll be saying our vows. And actually meaning every word, I said. Especially the partnership part, he added. For the first time since that fateful tea invitation, I let myself fully imagine our wedding day, not shadowed by resentment or mistrust, but grounded in something stronger. Because this wasn't just about surviving the Blackwoods test. It was about proving, To them, to Ethan, and maybe most of all to myself, that I would never sign away my worth for the sake of keeping the peace. And now I wouldn't. It wasn't flowery, it wasn't overly emotional, but it was sincere, and from Victoria, that sincerity was a rare currency. That can't have been easy to admit, I said quietly. A faint, rueful smile touched her lips. The Blackwoods aren't known for admitting mistakes. It's a family trait I hope Ethan and you will improve upon. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small velvet box, handing it to me. Inside was a pair of antique diamond and sapphire earrings, delicate, timeless, clearly valuable. These belonged to Ethan's great-grandmother, she explained. She was the daughter of a factory worker who married into the family against considerable opposition. She went on to save the Blackwood business during the Depression. I think she would have liked you. The parallels weren't lost on me. This was more than a gift. It was a symbolic passing of the torch. They're beautiful, I said, touched. Perhaps you'll wear them today. Something old, something blue, she suggested. I removed my pearl earrings and let her fasten the sapphires in their place. In the mirror, they caught the light with every slight movement of my head, glinting like small pieces of hard-won respect. Ethan loves you deeply, she said as she stepped back. That should have been enough for me from the start. I hope you can forgive my failure to see that. I think we've both learned something about assumptions and appearances, I said. She nodded, composed herself, and slipped out just as my father entered to walk me down the aisle. The ceremony itself was everything I'd hoped for, intimate in feeling despite the 200 guests, filled with quiet glances and unspoken promises between Ethan and me. When I reached him, the way he looked at me made everything else fade. The negotiations, the tension, the doubts. All that mattered in that moment was the man in front of me, ready to build a life on the tee. So we made a pact. Every decision about our life together would be ours alone, and whenever possible, we'd present those decisions to his family as a united front. The first test came sooner than I expected. 6 months after the wedding, Victoria began dropping hints about the long-standing Blackwood tradition of Sunday dinners. Every Sunday. No exceptions. Ethan didn't hesitate. Once a month, he told her privately. We need our own time and our own traditions. I braced for backlash, but to my surprise, Victoria accepted it with only mild resistance. Maybe it was the prenup precedent. Maybe it was the quiet shift in how she saw me. But whatever the reason, the conversation didn't turn into a battle. Richard's respect evolved in more practical ways. When the family law firm began exploring a major technology upgrade, he asked for my input and actually listened to my recommendations. When Underdog Solutions secured a large contract with the Chicago public school system, he sent a congratulatory note that was both professional and warm. We still had moments of tension. There were times when Victoria's tone edged back toward condescension, or when Richard assumed Ethan would handle financial matters alone. But those moments didn't go unchecked anymore. Ethan and I called them out, together, and slowly the dynamic shifted. The biggest change, though, was in our own household. We bought a home in a neighborhood we both loved, using a combination of our resources. Every major financial decision was discussed openly, with each of us bringing our strengths to the table, Ethan's legal expertise, my strategic business mindset. Neither of us dominated, neither of us deferred. The prenup itself stayed locked away in a safe deposit box, untouched since we signed it. I hoped we'd never need it, but the real value of that document wasn't its legal terms. It was the fact that we'd fool. Walking away was another option. That would have been clean, decisive, and maybe even justified. But it would also have meant abandoning a relationship I believed in, one that was worth fighting for, if it could be built on respect. So I chose the harder path, confrontation paired with truth. Not just the truth about the prenup's unfairness, but the truth about who I was, about the $9 million I had built and protected, about the fact that I wasn't the meek outsider they imagined. The choice changed everything. It forced Ethan to take a hard look at his own relationship with his family and decide where his loyalty truly lay. It forced his parents to reevaluate their assumptions, not just about me, but about what kind of marriage their son was entering. And it forced me to abandon the protective silence I had used to shield my wealth from influencing my relationships. I learned that you can't build a strong partnership by hiding parts of yourself, even with the best intentions. That secrecy, even when meant to protect, can create gaps that others will fill with their own narratives. narratives that may not serve you. I also learned that boundaries aren't a one-time declaration. They're a way of living reinforced with every decision and every interaction. The prenup was one line in the sand, but it set the tone for all the others we draw as a couple. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that respect is rarely handed to you. It's claimed, not with arrogance or aggression, but with clarity, consistency, and the willingness to walk away if necessary. To the Blackwoods, wealth had always been about power, about controlling outcomes, securing influence, and protecting status. To me, wealth had always been about independence, about choice and opportunity. When those two perspectives collided, something had to give. In the end, what gave way was the assumption that one side